Great. Okay, so and we'll just share my screen. Well, there's not much to share on the screen at this stage because it's just our intro slides. So I think.
Hello, Sana. Sorry to interrupt, but just letting you know I'm here. It's Clemmy.
Hi, Clemmy. Thanks for coming on.
No worries.
Great. Okay, so I was just kicking things off. All right, so today is, I believe, our third seminar. We do have 2 more sessions after this, and we're calling them seminars, but it'll kind of be more like this sort of open discussion and office hour type thing so that you have access to some more support. So today's session, before we kick off, just our general housekeeping rules. Please put yourself on mute when you're not speaking. I did hit record because there's a bunch of people who said they couldn't plug in today. So just to give them the chance, I hope that's okay with everybody. Today's session is really just a space for us to catch up. We've had some content come our way from different speakers over the last couple of weeks, months, and there's a bunch of you who have done the work towards submitting your theories of change and got some feedback. We've had a few iterations outside of these seminars as well, a bit more one-on-one support. There's a few of you on the call and those who also can't be here who are also getting a bit more of bespoke support from Spring on impact measurement, or equally have been participating in the Akina series on venture impact measurement. So there's been a lot of content that's come your way from different sources. And so we wanted to use today as a bit of an opportunity for us to go over any questions that are arising as you're reviewing some of that material. It's an opportunity for us to review your theory of change if you'd like more feedback on it, potentially looking deeper at some of the actual indicators. And as I'd mentioned at the back of our last webinar, where we had speakers from Impact Management Project and B-Lab, they shared with us different templates that are available. For example, on the IMP resource page, they pointed us to an Excel sheet that allows you to look at the impact of an enterprise. And so if anyone has had a chance to do that or would like to walk through that, that's something that we can do today. As well as if you would like to maybe review the B impact assessment as a possible tool for yourselves, or for your ventures even, as you're starting to put together your organizational impact framework. That's what today is for, just reviewing any content, going through any questions you may have, seeing where you are in your overall impact measurement and management framework as an organization, and then getting support from myself and Clemmy. And Clemmy, thank you so much. I know you're at a conference, and so I appreciate you being able to make it on the call and being
no worries.
Yeah. I think we've had a few more people log in, which is great. Welcome, Aulia. Welcome from CIAP. I'm not sure I've spoken to, who's on the line from CIAP? If you want to take yourself off mute, that would be great, just to say hello. Hello in chat. Okay, great. Welcome to the call. Okay, so I do have this slide in front of me, but I just want to open it up at this stage and ask anybody on the call who has been attending the different webinars and seminars, and if you have any questions or thoughts or anything specific that you would like to ask at this stage about any of the tools that we've shared, and the speakers that have come. If you have questions listening to the recordings, feel free to fire away. And if you prefer, you can also just put your question in chat, and then we can address it like that if that's easier for you.
And don't all rush.
I had a look at the IMP template.
Yeah.
That was shared in the last recording, and it's very interesting, very thorough.
Yeah.
I found it really challenging to I was kind of trying to fill it in a test way, like not fully, but I found it quite challenging to use. I think I can see how it would be useful to kind of, as a tick box, like to check when I like going through the theory of change and then building metrics on top of that, and then maybe looping it back to this and checking if you've kind of ticked all of the IMP boxes of what, who, how much, and all of that. But when I tried to do it straight in here, I was like, I didn't last very long.
Yeah. So maybe what we can do, just for everyone's benefit, is I will just, and I think I may have put it here, just bear with me while I look at the resources, because I think I stuck the template in here as well. And I will resume sharing my screen.
Yeah, I think it would have been cool to like see an example, because I wasn't totally clear on, okay, what do they mean by each of those headings? What do I put where?
Yeah.
And that kind of thing.
I think that's quite good insight, and you're not the only one. So
yes.
I think the impact management project, that I think that template is useful for the same thing, for like being a filter and doing the theory of change first and then having a look and saying, what have I missed? Particularly when you get to the measurement part, because it's easy with the theory of change to be focused on the outcomes, and I think you shouldn't be restricting the scope of what outcomes you include by what you can measure, but sometimes you might leave off a bit of how much or something like that if you just start with the theory of change. So I think that's the right order: do your theory of change first and then the impact management project. And I had another thought and now I can't think of it. But I think it's relatively new in development, so there aren't a lot of built out case studies. So I think also, interestingly, I spoke to an old colleague who is the co-chair of Social Value International, and he said they are interested in hearing examples of how people are using it. So if you're using it and trying to push the thinking forwards on how to use it, you're probably like helping to lead the charge on this stuff. So don't give up, and maybe even they would be interested in hearing your insights.
Yeah, no,
that's reassuring. Thank you.
Spot on, Cami. Cool. And I think that was kind of the overall intention as well, to show that there's this whole toolkit of different resources that are out there. You need to kind of pick and choose what's going to make sense for your unique situation, but also realize that they're complementary. And I think actually, Clemmy, on the webinar, you had asked Joe this question about where a theory of change fits in. And so just to reinforce that message that it is complementary, this template is complementary to the theory of change. And so, Abby, I'm glad that you also brought up that you struggled with it, because as promised, I tried to do it for spring. And so I can pull that up as well if it is helpful. And I wasn't able to complete it. So I'm just going to...
That would be really good to look at. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no worries. So by the way, and this is for everybody on the call, like one of the deliverables that Spring has, or I have been working on for FI as part of this seminar, is to share with you a bit of a guide on how we at Spring do impact measurement. And I have to say that even for myself, like going through this process a second time in a much more deeper way and looking at these different resources, like even when I was trying to do this one template, it's just allowed me to have a much more robust picture of how to create an impact framework. And so my message to anyone on the call who's just starting out or is kind of halfway through is that it's really important to get started, because we can always make different improvements. And so this is the template, just the blank template, which is available on the IMP website. And so I believe that they have created it such that one as an enterprise can go through the 5 dimensions. And the way that they set it out is there's a space to answer each question. I think they said there's about 15 different elements that you can fill in. And so when I started to do this for spring, one of the things I think, as I've mentioned in the past, is that we think about our impact from using the SDG lens as well. And so trying to match up with which sustainable development goal do our activities tie up. And so I like the fact that, yes, you can talk about the outcome, but then also tie it to the specific SDG. And so that's a mapping that we have done. And then I just tried to go down. And so I think the first impact was to promote development policies like entrepreneurship, right? That's a big thing that that Spring is trying to do, is to make impact entrepreneurship mainstream. And so thinking about, like, we know that we work in entrepreneur communities, maybe the outcome over time is that we should be looking more at the proportion or the percentage of impact entrepreneur communities for the overall community served, as a way to understand how mainstream our efforts are becoming. And then try to fill in, okay, well, who are the stakeholders in particular? For geographical boundary, I was a little bit stuck, because some of that we're very global, so maybe it should be global. And yeah, so for me, like I said, I just started to do this, but then I also, for example, when it came to like contribution and risk, it was a bit more of a challenge for me to fill these things in. It's by no means complete. And then you'll see that you can kind of work through each of the buckets and put, okay, well, how are you actually going to collect that data for each of the impacts that you have? And I think they give you space for about 4 impact measures that you're looking to create. So I think even just going through the initial first step, and Abby, feel free to share your experience of trying to do a mock one as well. For me, it made me think about, we've mapped out our theory of change. We have the indicators that we already have in place and that we're measuring. Does that tie into these 5 dimensions? And so it was a nice way to kind of match those 2 things, or different disparate things up. But there were certain questions that I found would be harder to answer. And I think because it's a template, what I was missing as a user, and maybe this is the type of feedback as well to give them, is like a little bit of a explanation or an example, I think would be really useful. So that was missing for me too. So anyway, that was my first stab. I don't know if anybody else on the call has, other than Abby, tried to, but Abby, do you want to share more about what were the specific areas that you were struggling with?
The not having examples is what I was struggling with, because like indicator feels very different for like, the outcome, the outcome level in period, outcome threshold, and then some of the like ones lower down, I didn't understand what it meant by indicator, like what might be an indicator for those ones. Yeah. And then also like when you have more than one perhaps that would qualify for one row, like would you just squeeze them all into one box? So like the kind of how that would look visually.
Yes, just like the basics.
Yeah. And then just defining like the difference between the columns. So like is source like your source? So do you get it from your surveys? Is that what it's asking? And then data is like the results that you've had coming out of it. So 20% or whatever. I just wasn't quite entirely sure like what goes in what column.
Yeah. No, that's I think consistent, and I guess like the question is also for me, like the way I read it is that the indicated data source, does that only apply to that first column of outcome level or outcome threshold? I mean, because it wouldn't make sense on some of the other ones, to your point, right? So I think it's a good starting point, as you mentioned at the front, Abby, in terms of being a bit of a checklist, but also as being a complement to what you've done with your theory of change and the underlying indicators that you have.
I may be wrong, and I'm nervous because it's being recorded and I could be wrong, but my assumption would be that the data source is where are you going to get that? So normally when I would fill out a measurement framework, I'd write what is the outcome, like what is the kind of impact theme area, then what's the outcome, and then what's the indicator. So that's what's the thing that you're going to use as a clue that you've achieved that outcome. And then I also would fill out what's the data source, and the data source can either be like the online traffic to your website, which is showing that your service is being used, for example, and that people like it, or whatever your indicator is about. But it also could be, the source could also be a person, like the parent of the participant in the program. So your source is where you're going to get the data from, and then separately you have like your kind of method of extracting that data. So it might be a survey or a electronic extraction. But without having it in front of me, sorry, that I'm on the move at a conference, that's my assumption for what they're meaning by source.
Yeah, I think that sounds about right, because it could be almost, as you said, like internal or external, because there's certain things that you would extract from surveys, or like self-reported versus other things that are, you're administering and trying to understand. So yeah, it's a bit of both. So for anybody else on the call, has anybody else had a chance to look at this impact management template, or have any thoughts or questions? And again, feel free to put it in chat if you don't want to come off mute for this. I think if you take a peek, and first of all, I'm just going to again signpost the impact management project as a great resource anyway. I think the reason that it is important to use this tool and template as a bit of a complement to whatever you're doing on an existing basis is because the IMP and those 5 dimensions have become more of the global consensus on how impact is defined. And so, 5 years ago even, and, Clemmy, feel free to share your thoughts on this too, but if you asked a fund manager how they define impact versus how an enterprise did it, or any kind of intermediary, you would get, and you probably still will get, different answers from a qualitative perspective as to how people describe the impact that they're looking to have. But I think there's just more of an imperative now to use the IMP and to look at those 5 dimensions when you're describing your impact, to be able to say that, you've considered that, because again, this project is the byproduct of over 2,000 different impact intermediaries speaking into that very question on what impact is. So I think that as a baseline, it is a tool that we should all be looking at. And I believe, Clemmy, even in the venture theme, you guys did cover it to show how ventures can be aware of the 5 dimensions as they think about the impact that they are creating. And so do check out the website again, like under resources. They have lots of great different resources and different things to plug into. But Clemmy, feel free to add anything.
Yeah, and on top of that, we're also seeing a lot of impact investors using this approach. So a lot of the organisations you're working with won't be at the level of seeking investment, but maybe for future proofing, some of them, they might be interested in aligning themselves with this framework so that when they do grow and can attract investment, they are speaking the same language as the impact investors.
Yes. And I think, I don't know who's on the call from Social Innovation. I'm just going to take a peek. No, I don't see them on the call, but there's one of the orgs. And I think, Moon, if you listen to this recording later, it could be helpful for you guys, because with this particular organization in Indonesia, they were saying how they are looking to really be that better connector between investors and enterprises. And so thinking about the different resources or the ways that impact investors in particular are thinking about impact, and aligning that with how impact ventures can do that themselves will just make it much cleaner. Because if you think about an impact investor or an impact fund from a portfolio approach, having consistency with how ventures are thinking about impact and describing and monitoring and measuring their impact could just be a lot more seamless. So I encourage everyone to try and take a look at that. And so that was the impact management project. Did anyone have any other questions on either the assessment or any of the other tools like the Gali Value for Money tool? Or if you want to just share with us where you're at in your own impact measurement journey and what you're currently struggling with, like what is holding you back with taking the next step towards improving how you measure and manage your impact? Or what are you finding really easy to do, or what's the stress? Like what are your current challenges?
Yeah, hi Sana, Bilal here. So I think for us being a very, very tiny organization, I think the biggest challenge obviously is to find time to go through the formal assessments, and in reality also lack of any clear incentive beyond holding ourselves accountable to ourselves. So where we are is that we've kind of formalized a process of recording our own data. So this includes engagement, this includes our impact of our ventures. So we've put a process together where we're creating a dashboard for all our ventures, where we record their impact, and a dashboard for all the events and activities that we host, in addition to our incubation program, and record the impact and people being reached through those activities, so that at least a year or so down the road, when we are better staffed and in a position to make a case of the impact that we've been making, we have the at least the basic source information. And I think as we discussed on our one-on-one calls, we're hoping that we'll be able to take at least some of this sort of learning through one iteration before we conclude the FI program, one iteration with you, so that we're kind of prepared for doing this at a full scale once we have the data and the manpower to do it.
Yeah, no, and thank you so much for sharing, Bilal, to kind of describe on one hand the process, but also to acknowledge, I think it is important to acknowledge that one of the issues with impact and monitoring in general is that it can sometimes take a little bit of a lower priority, given a lot of us, yes, we have small teams. And so I think it is important to appreciate the time that you and your very small team, which is only just slightly growing, is doing towards setting the right foundation. And also, I think, with that big vision of what Takhliq is trying to do with, of course, supporting better job creation of more high value added and sustainable enterprises, but also to really your mission statement, like about being the leading university business incubator in Pakistan, like having a good way to communicate the change that you're having and hence the impact that you're creating. It's all good steps. But is there anything in particular that you would like to highlight that you found a little bit challenging, or potentially, one of the things, Bilal, that we've been talking about is a little bit of a rubric around entrepreneurial mindset as a way to show what's happening to folks as they go through the program per se. So do you want to share a little bit more about that and maybe get some feedback on the call? And before you do, just as some context for everybody else on the call, so as part of our support to Takhliq under the FI banner, we've been helping them, of course, deepen their impact measurement and management processes. And one of the things that Bilal and Azair from his team we've been talking about is having a more quantitative way to look at entrepreneurial mindset, because in their case, for instance, it's largely the student population that goes through a program. And so these are, and Bilal, you can share more in terms of age of where people are at, but really being able to sense what has been the impact of going through the Takhliq bootcamp to how, of course, there's ventures that are being incubated as part of that, but how has overall mindset changed? And so, yeah, just as context for everybody, but Bilal, feel free to share a little bit more.
Sure. So yeah, as Sana mentioned, at Takhliq, we're trying to sort of create not just a good incubator, but really be the model of how university incubation can work. Relatively new ecosystem. Like what we've discovered is that the biggest challenge is the entrepreneurial mindset, or lack thereof, on the adult population more than the youth. So I think one challenge that we've posed to ourselves is that how do we so a lot of our activities, a lot of our focus has to go toward improving that and working on that. But then we also want to hold ourselves accountable and see which activities are being more fruitful in creating that mindset. So when we talk about our youth, the biggest obstacle they face in moving towards entrepreneurship is lack of family support. That's what they cite. Mm-hmm. Now the question is that if we do activities that are targeted towards their parents, toward their families, then how do we figure out whether that is meaningfully changing that mindset? And similarly, the activities that we do for the students also, we want to measure how that's having an impact. So far, the most of the sort of feedback that we have received is by participants self-reporting and saying whether they're more inclined towards going into entrepreneurship, or at least supporting entrepreneurship in their peers and in their social circles. That's one way, but I think I also want to kind of that's often because the event is focused on that and it's relatively positive and motivating. People end up saying, yeah, sure, I'll support more. So I want to suss out the truth a little bit better. But yeah, so I think our next step is that at these events, we're going to try and at least do this self-reporting continuously and see whether that then translates to better participation, better engagement during the programs, a broadening of the network, engagement on social media. So all of those things we are kind of right now we're thinking of them as the next step in trying to measure this. But I really do want to find out what the truth is, and not just rely on the self-reporting.
So I can see we have Komal from Social Innovation Lab also in Lahore, and potentially for the rest of you who are in similar sort of markets where there's a large sort of youth entrepreneurship. First of all, have you, the statement that Bilal made with regards to if there's more family approval, then folks tend to be more open to entrepreneurship, or young people tend to open up their minds to entrepreneurship. I'm just curious, is that true in your own contexts as well? That's the first question. And then the second, for anybody who wants to share, is how are you currently looking at entrepreneurial mindset when you, or either entrepreneurial mindset or business mindset, or some of the more, what's the right word? Not psychological, but more, like a life skill almost, when you're thinking about and you're measuring your impact. So first question, like this sort of undercurrent about youth entrepreneurship and exposure. Is that something that you are experiencing in your own context and can share some insights? And then second, around entrepreneurial mindset. Anybody who feels like sharing, I would love to hear from you. Clemmy, did you want to say something?
Oh, sorry, I've unmuted.
Oh, okay.
No, I didn't mean to, and I dropped my phone.
Okay. All good.
I am here if anyone has questions.
Yes, great. So does anyone feel like sharing on either of those areas?
So in terms of, it was very interesting to hear from Bilal, actually, because we try to measure the same thing in terms of like one thing that we're finding hard is measuring growth in entrepreneurs or startups, because there's a very small number of the startups that we're working with. We can measure like traditional growth metrics like revenue and employees and things. So there isn't really enough data to like have something interesting to say there when we're writing proposals or reporting. But then trying to figure out, okay, what are the right growth metrics that are separate to that, such as entrepreneurial mindset. And we ask questions like, how likely are you to start a business in the future, and things like that, which is interesting. But yeah, we get like 100% yes from people. So then it's like, is that the best?
No kidding. 100% yes.
Yes.
We tried it once and we got like 100% from like 40, like a cohort of 40 people or something. And so it was like, okay, everyone's very excited.
Yes, but I mean, there's that buzz around events. Like I remember very clearly.
It wasn't at an event. It was after the program had finished.
Okay.
Like by a couple of weeks.
Okay.
So, yeah, it was amazing.
That's pretty amazing. But I think, to Bilal, and we've discussed this, like there's, as Abby described, the qualitative questions, like with regards to understanding, like, willingness or interest, capacity. And then there's what we've been talking about, like a little bit more quantitative scoring. So kind of to say, hey, are you like a 5 out of 10 on your entrepreneurial mindset before? And are you an 8 out of 10 after, or 6 months after? So just trying to play around with different methods. I think starting out with more qualitative scoring, as we've talked about, like on these scales to figure out how likely what people's aptitude are. That also does show some insights. I mean, Abby, 100% of everyone wanting to start a business, like that's, if you do that again, and if you start to see consistent sort of trends in that, I think it would start to show you that there's clearly, either it's the content that's being delivered, or is it the stories that people get to hear, but there's something that is being created that is resulting in that number, right? So I wouldn't discount it completely, but of course you'd have to repeat it more than once to kind of know what's going on. Does anybody else on the call have any insights on how they track, either qualitatively or quantitatively, the change in willingness to be an entrepreneur, or in overall business skills, or anything like that, especially if you're working with earlier stage businesses, which, as Abby also mentioned, you can't necessarily track revenue or profit growth because they're just not at that stage yet.
I like that you're thinking about what the first sign of change might look like. They have a desire to start a business in the future. I'm interested to know what you think the first action might look like, and if you can build some kind of a system to get visibility of that action. Like, for example, can you start a simple Facebook group where you invite people to record their ideas for new businesses for comment by the group in the 6 months after the session, and then you could kind of monitor level of activity around that.
Well, I think that baby had some opinions.
Sorry, not mine.
No, all good, all good. Usually it's mine, so it's fine. No, that's a really good point, Clemmy. And Abby, for both you and Bilal, like thinking about, especially, and I think the example related more to what Abby was describing, like, is there a way to set up a system to then capture, okay, well, you've indicated that you're 100% likely to start a new business. What's the next step? So, for example, if we are working with, if all those folks get put into an alumni group, is there a way for us to engage with them on a continual basis to have them speak into those types of questions, or for us to better track what's going on? So that might be something to explore. And the same for you, Bilal, as you're starting out, like thinking about what you would ask folks now when they're in programs, but then what are the different types of things to ask them as when they become alumni?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. It's sort of a longitudinal study, right? You kind of stay with them for a while and see that how their life decisions are changing, and how's that impacting. I think as a university, we should anyway be doing that, because I think understanding the longitudinal behavior of our students helps us improve, our system across the board. So what I can try to do is that we can try to plug in with the Alumni Relations Office and see if there's a way that we can actually track these, and sometimes tag the students who've gone through our programs and see how their life story is meaningfully different or not from the rest of the cohort.
Yeah, I think that would be quite interesting, and especially like
worthy of a paper in a conference, probably.
Sorry, Clemmy, go ahead.
I was just going to say the obvious, but remind everyone of the fact that past behaviour is a much better indicator of change than predicted future behaviour. So wherever you can, you should look for opportunities to show that they have done something. So ask them, what have you done in the last month that's indicative of change, rather than what do you think you will do in the future. So where's your mindset out at now that demonstrates where you think you will go, isn't as strong as asking what have you done. So you can you're better to have a guess at how the behaviour that they're manifesting now, the activities that they're doing now, is indicative of future behaviour, rather than ask them what they think they will do in the future.
Excellent point.
Yeah, I think that's a really useful point, because we're constantly like asking people to self-assess, like, what are you going to do? And actually, if we can just decide what are the actions that we think the most successful entrepreneurs and early stage entrepreneurs take, then we can just be looking for those and like monitoring those. I think that's a really useful point. Thank you so much.
No worries.
Great. Okay, so anybody else who has any thoughts on that, or we can, oh wait, there's someone who's messaged something in chat. So, okay. So this is from Siap, and thank you for being on the call instead of Moon, and that comment that I had made with regards to the impact management project and investors and entrepreneurs was related to Siap. So I'm just going to read out what was provided in chat. So Siap is also in this stage of connecting our founders to the impact mindset. We're still trying to localize the knowledge of impact to them. In Indonesia, the mindset is still quite skeptical on businesses that do good, because there are already so many social organizations, NGOs, that make the stigma of doing good is just not their business. So they're trying to simplify the learning process by redefining the root problem, creating outcomes and indicators, and collecting data as a routine activity of their business. And they want to make their founders understand the mindset is of managing impact is not like doing additional homework, but is just like doing their taxes. It's integrated into their business. Thanks for being on the call, Bilal and Azair. Appreciate it. And of course, it'll be recorded so you can plug back to the rest of it. Sorry, so just to conclude that, so basically they want folks, impact entrepreneurs who go through their programs to understand that managing your impact is an integral way of being an impact business, just as you would your taxes. And so I really appreciate you sharing that from the CAP team, because I think, you know, as impact enterprises, but also as impact organizations ourselves that are trying to build the ecosystem and make the entrepreneurship communities that we work in stronger, we all have a role to play in ensuring that this mindset around creating more sustainable ventures is more commonplace, because that's how we're going to have sort of deeper change. And part of that is being able to communicate your impact. And in order to do that, having a system in place, and I really like how you said that, to not treat it as additional homework, but to have it fully integrated is a really good way of framing it. And I just wonder, for everyone on the call, how integrated is, on one hand, working with ventures to support them in creating your impact, their impact, as well as how you as an organization are communicating your impact? How integrated are both those facets, into your overall operations? I'm not sure if anybody feels like sharing.
For us, it's quite separate at the moment. Like, the focus has really been on measuring our own impact. And then when particular organizations want support with measuring their impact, then we've started offering that, but it's very separate.
And so, Abby, when you say it's separate, when people go through one of your boot camps or programs, is there specific content that's delivered on impact measurement and management?
On the kind of earlier stage programs, no. On Accelerate 2030 which is our like only Accelerator program, it is featured in that. So yeah.
And would you like it to be integrated in the formal, or do you find that the incubation stage entrepreneurs are just so early that they're not even thinking about that yet?
I'm not really sure, to be honest. I think there is probably also variation among the different entrepreneurs and programs. I think for us at the moment, a more targeted approach, like working one-on-one with people, is good. But then again, like, also it doesn't hurt to like introduce it early on, even if they're not going to start looking at it in great depth. It still might be worth bringing it up during the early stage programs. But perhaps it wouldn't be like a very big feature still.
And so what about anybody else on the call who does work with early stage entrepreneurs? Again, the first question, like, how integrated, or do you actively have content to, and apologies for the person who's on the line from CAP, because your name shows up as Fikbar, so I hope I pronounced that correctly. So maybe for Fikbar, in your case, like, what are you doing to encourage that impact mindset from the get-go? Is it content delivery, or is it, as Abby's describing, more here's how you can measure your impact as an organization, this is a toolkit? How exactly are you getting them in that mode from the very beginning? And if you can't speak, and if you'd like to put that in chat, that would be really helpful, I think, for the rest of the group as well. While maybe he takes a second to do that, I just wanted to highlight Bilal and Uzair again from Takhliq in this case, because Spring has been working with Eye to Eye and Uncharted on our support to Takhliq, and one of the things around content, and Abby, to the thing that we just talked about in terms of how early on is impact introduced. One of the things that the team at Takhliq has done is created a very simple sort of session that will be delivered on impact so they're really incubation idea stage folks, and the goal here is to introduce them to a basic theory of change and logic model, and get them to maybe work on an exercise or two to really instigate that thinking about how they can think about their own impact, but then also realize that it's part of a bigger sort of framework where you need to come up with indicators and think about how you're going to measure that, etc. But the goal with this intro session and the deck that they created was just to plant the seed. And the intention is that when the program runs at a later stage, maybe in 6 months, or potentially the iteration next year, they can get much deeper from the beginning. And so that could be, something to consider for everybody on the call who maybe doesn't have that fully in place just yet. But if we get our ventures to think about this from an early stage, then it will just build up, going forward. And then for us as organizations as well, if we are able to have a baseline system as to how we're thinking about all these different measures and indicators, then again, you can get deeper over time. So Fikbar, I'm not sure if you've had a chance to think about that question about how you're integrating an impact mindset into your cohorts. If you're able to share on chat or get off mute, that would be really helpful. And in the meantime, does anybody else want to share? So I see Vera and Aulia on the call from Instellar. Do either of you want to talk about how you are supporting ventures in describing and talking about their impact, and then how that kind of adds into how you as Instellar understand the impact that you are creating? If you feel like getting off mute, that would be great. So while maybe Aulia and Vera can have a think, so the response from Fikbar and Siap is that we're trying to ask them to create a simple survey that measures their pre and post business activities to their customers' beneficiaries. So they try to mix it as market research, which they understand the importance of. So it sounds like they are getting, as part of the way that they're advocating and making this more a common practice for the ventures that they support is, as ventures try and do market research, they get them also to add on a survey that kind of sees business activity pre and post their sort of intervention to flesh out, okay, well, what is the real change that we can have here? From what I understand. So Fikbar, please feel free to correct me if that was not fully what you were trying to say. And then I think he has a question. What do we think about putting pressure on founders to try and implement impact management, like giving them homework? So great question. What do you think about, let's say, compelling founders to do impact management as part of their homework, or as if it was homework? Anybody have any thoughts? So maybe while you guys are collecting your thoughts, I will share an example of, and I think it's Vancouver-based um, incubator that that I'm aware of, that runs two different programs. And the one program, which was kind of like an acceleration program, split into different modules, one of them being impact. They effectively made a lot, a lot was mandated. So basically, before you started the program, you may not have had a good understanding of how you were going to measure your impact. But once you left the program, having done all the different exercises like drafting your theory of change, coming up with indicators, actually having a full-fledged system in place for how you were going to collect the data, how you were going to measure it, talk about it, analyze it, how you're going to report on it. They would make them do the B assessment as a way to just understand their sort of baseline. So I've seen approaches like that where it's very sort of bolted into the program with specific outcomes and deliverables that are must-haves. But then I've also seen programs where it's much more light touch, and there's a template or a toolkit of different resources that are offered. And then there's not as much sort of accountability. So I've seen both. And then we have a response from Aulia from Instellar that says they run a workshop on impact models where they get ventures to draft their impact logic, and then it's facilitated as well. And I believe, Aulia, that's a session also that Akina Foundation, as part of their support to you, helped you make some amendments in terms of style and delivery and content, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct? Yeah, perfect. So I think, Fikber, to your question, it sounds like there are different ways to make that a bit more mandated. It can be such as what Aulia is describing, by running a workshop, a facilitated expert workshop where ventures get to go through the exercise, but then also get feedback at the same way. It can be even lighter touch where it's just an introduction to the content and then, figure things out. Or it can be really, really deep where it's the content, it's access to experts, plus a must-have deliverable at the end of the program is bam, 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 you need to have these things mapped out. So I think that, all right, and I'm just going to give you my opinion here, and Clemmy, I'd love to hear your thoughts if you have any, is that in what we're all trying to do with make more sustainable businesses thrive, in my opinion, it's just as important for us to drive home the point around how to create a sustainable venture, i.e. with a sustainable business model, one that has all its cash flows mapped out, has its growth scenarios built, all that good, important stuff. But it's just as important to be strong on your impact model, because if you're in the business of changing the world, you can't do that unless you have a sustainable model in place. But also, you need to be able to communicate what you're doing. So yeah, Clemmy, feel free to add any thoughts.
Yes, I agree. I think impact models are very important. And I would also say, if you've been trying to think of how you do your impact model for your organisation, sorry for the loud traffic now, but I think that it's much easier to do an impact model for a venture, because you're not that one step removed from impact, and they can more easily select an ultimate impact goal than you can. So first tip is it's not as hard. And then to the discussion about how to do it and how light touch or heavy touch, I think it depends on the cohort and the point that they're at. For idea stage ventures, I think it's really valuable as a refinement process to help them go through the exercise and help them refine their focus so that they're not trying to solve the whole world while they're designing their business. They're just trying to focus on what's achievable, and also set them up to be able to measure right from the start so that they can kind of show progress over time.
Yeah.
And one of the ways we do it is, yes, we'll do a workshop with a bunch of organisations, and then we'll invite them to share with us their draft areas of change once they've developed them. And that's quite a good filtering process, I find. Like, do the bigger workshop with the big group, and then invite the ones that are most likely to actually follow through to share their drafts with you, and then support them by reviewing the draft and working it up with them in more detail. Alternatively, if you have the capacity, I think there's real value in being a critical friend and helping an organisation to understand their impact. So listening to their story and turning it into the theory of change for them in a facilitated session. So that's kind of the gold standard. If you can be that critical friend and stand with them and say, okay, I can hear your stories, and now I'm turning that story into an outcome, and then we can work together to order the outcome. That's the best if you can.
Yeah, and really appreciate that, Clemmy. And I think, like, for anybody on the call who is at that stage, as Siap is pointing out, trying to really inculcate that impact mindset, it would be a really good thing to review some of the webinar materials from the Akina Foundation. And of course, I think, Clemmy, if they have questions, to reach out directly, get a little bit deeper on how they can set up the right content and modules, etc. But I think, to Clemmy's point, like, it's when you're doing this exercise as an organization, it is a bit deeper, but at the same time, I think if we think about our own impact mindset as an organization, do we have the right system in place, and how integrated can we make it for ourselves as an organization? For example, like, Spring is now 5 years old. The first 2 years, I think, as I've mentioned, we didn't really have a very robust system in place, and now we're just continuing to make it stronger, right? So realizing that there will be iteration as well is important. We have another comment from Aulia saying, to integrate our impact model, we currently ask them in, I'm not sure I know what FGD means, Aulia. Focus group discussion. Okay, my bad. Okay, we currently ask them in focus group discussion after the program, so 3 to 5 enterprises per cohort, and show them the impact model, and then they ask for feedback and see if there's any correction input. So thank you for sharing. So basically, they try and integrate the enterprise's feedback into their own impact model, and to see whether, for example, and Alia, feel free to jump in here or to share any more thoughts. But for instance, if you thought that this particular indicator, or this particular workshop helps to serve as an indicator of X or of Y, going through that process in the smaller focus group, and when you ask certain questions, you're like, oh, actually no, that workshop or that particular session didn't actually help for us to understand, let's say, revenue growth, because their understanding didn't really improve. So having the cohort involved in the feedback loop, I think, is one way that in Stellar, for example, is trying to be more involved in their impact model. So Ali, I hope I captured that, but please feel free to jump in if there's anything else. Okay, so first of all, thank you all. We've had a pretty good interactive conversation on how to use the impact management project. overall entrepreneurial mindset and how we can capture both qualitative and quantitative data. Thank you to CIAP also for talking about impact mindset and how we can embed that in the ventures that we support, and also to Aulia and Instella for sharing their approach in doing so. With the time that we have left in the call, I wanted to ask and see, as we're having this conversation, is anything bubbling in any of your minds about, okay, that's not something that I necessarily thought about for our impact management framework, but that makes sense, or that's a tool I'd like to try, or no, I'm confused, I need to know more. It's just, this is a safe collaborative space, and I think there's so much that we can all learn from each other. So anybody feel compelled to say something or have any questions? And again, put it in chat if you don't want to come off mute, but I'd love to hear from some more of you if possible. No, everyone feels good? Okay. Yeah, I mean, if everyone feels pretty good and doesn't have any questions, I'll just, maybe we can wrap up a little bit early and give you all some time back in terms of what comes next. And maybe just while I'm kind of wrapping things up, if you do have any other questions or comments, please feel free to type them in or come off mute. Just going to... Can you guys see the slide? I hope so. Okay. And so we have, as I had mentioned, we have 2 more sessions left in our time together that consist of a similar sort of open conversation and discussion like we've done today. Our next session, and I think I just need to update the dates, because I believe we have 2 sessions in August. We will be wrapping up this a theme on organizational impact measurement at the end of August. And so the 2 sessions left, I believe, is August 6th and potentially August 27th, if I'm not mistaken, being our final session together. What I had down initially for the next one on August 6th was tech platforms and tools. I know that Akina has done or has shared with you some tips and frameworks already in one of their webinar sessions, so we'll build upon that. But really the goal is to provide you again with that space to ask some of the more practical questions about, I don't know, how you collect the data, or what's the best platform, what's the best way to understand what's going on. If anybody is at a point where you are willing to share, where you are in your impact journey as an org, what the framework looks like, any specific questions. Basically, that's what, the time that we have left together is really to be super practical, action-oriented. If you've tried out a survey and you want some feedback on either the questions that you ask, or, maybe you also want to do some sharing of, okay, these are the types of things that we've asked in the past and didn't work, and then we tried them out and this is what did work. I think that there could be some great learning from each other. And so I have a question from Komal of Social Innovation Lab saying, our social enterprises have indirect beneficiaries as well, like families, empowered, etc. So do indirect beneficiaries count in our impact as well as an intermediary? So great question, Komal, and thank you for asking. And
sorry, would you mind repeating the question?
Yeah, of course. So the question, Clemmy, was in Pakistan, in the ventures that Social Innovation Lab supports, they have indirect beneficiaries as well, such as families empowered. And what she's trying to understand is, do indirect beneficiaries count in our impact, in their impact as an intermediary as well? And so, yeah, my first thought when I hear that question is actually maybe even to go back to that IMP tool as a checklist, because under the who and the how much, if you were to classify direct and indirect beneficiaries, then you can start to see, okay, well, for a direct beneficiary, what is the tide indicator for how we're going to understand what's going on? And maybe first, to be really simple, the way I would do it is to really just look at the outputs before I started to look at outcomes, just to keep it sort of clean for yourself. I think, and this is where it starts to get harder as well for us as intermediaries, because absolutely there are indirect beneficiaries, and it's not always as straightforward to understand what's going on with them. I think this is also where we start to shift from output to outcome thinking. And so if you had an outcome that could quantify potentially, so for example, thinking about this one company that I came across through a different project that is trying to increase access to dental services in a country in Latin America. Their model is to work with the companies to provide a dental health program. So the business model is such that the company pays for the employee who has access to dental health services. However, as part of that offering, because this social enterprise wants to activate better dental health in the community as a whole, they offer access to those services to the family. And so not necessarily a direct, but a more indirect beneficiary. And so one of the outcomes that they are just trying to understand a little bit more is what proportion of families receive, or the wider household receive access to better dental health services as a proportion of all the beneficiaries. So I hope from what I've seen, that type of analysis helps you understand. And yes, it should be something that you consider, because when you're thinking, if, for example, in the case of this company, like they are trying to, provide access to dental health to all people in their community. And so whether or not they're the ones that are directly paying for it, it's part of their impact mission. So they need to have a system in place to understand how that's going to be captured. So those are just my initial thoughts, Komal, but I think, Clemmy, you might have some ideas as well.
Yeah, thanks, Anna. So the answer is unhelpful from me, because I would say the answer is it depends on the venture. And even more unhelpfully, the term we usually use to help you determine whether to include the secondary beneficiaries, the ancillary beneficiaries or not, is whether they are affected in a material way, which really doesn't tell you that much more, but that's the standard line. It's if they're affected in a material way. But another way I try to think of it sometimes is to think of whether the program is designed to benefit those people. So, for example, if you think of a parenting program, the children never attend that parenting program, but the parenting program is directly designed to benefit the children. The attendees at the program are parents, the people that they engage with, the people who are learning things are the parents. The parents go home and change their behaviour with their children. So in that circumstance, certainly the children are beneficiaries of the program. But for other programs where it's an ancillary benefit, it's really difficult for you to claim it for yourself, because there might be other factors that are contributing to the benefit that family is having, or that community. And so it's better to rely on one of the 7 principles of social return on investment, which is don't overclaim. It's better for you to not include it, but then have a tagline on your theory of change or your logic model and say, we've measured the impact on this person and they've told us that it's benefited their family. We haven't measured the impact for the family because we don't want to overclaim, but we are certain that there is benefit to families.
Yeah, no, and I think that was really helpful, Clemmy, because even with that example that I was sharing from this enterprise in Latin America, clearly for them in that instance, it is something that is important and material, and hence going in that direction of wanting to include indirect beneficiary impact is part of the overall mission of what they're trying to do. But I really appreciate this with those 7 principles of social value, and this one of like not overclaiming. I think to your point, even if you indicate that we know that there's this, external impact that's being created, and we can, in our surveys, we've asked this question, but being just clear, I think that's one of the key messages, is to just be really clear about what is being measured and to be transparent about what is not being measured, is a good place to start. So Komal, I guess, I hope that helps provide you with some color. And if you, for example, in the either now or in the sessions that we have left, if you did want to get deeper on that particular topic, or if, for example, if you'd like to share an example of an enterprise and how you're struggling with how to do that, that would be good to bring to the group. So, but thank you for asking the question. Did that trigger anything for anybody else? Any other thoughts? Okay, so on that note, we'll end just about 10 minutes earlier today. Thank you all for being on today's seminar. I think it was really helpful to have some live examples of what people are doing, what we're struggling with, what are some of the tools and templates out there that we can all try and use and see whether it works for our specific situations. If anybody else wants to try and take a stab at the IMP template, feel free. If you want to get some feedback on it, please do send it over so we can take a look, or we can also discuss it in our next call. If you do have more specific questions to your own organizations and you just want to talk through something, do feel free to reach out and we can set up a time to chat a little bit more and help you get unstuck on whatever it is you're trying to navigate. And Clemmy, thank you again for making time. I know you're at this conference. I think it was really insightful to have you on the call and hear about your own experiences doing this with different ventures, but also different types of stakeholders. So really appreciate you making the time
No worries.
to be here. And yeah, if nobody has any other thoughts or comments, I will call our seminar to an end. And since it has been recorded, once the FI team makes it available, I will just provide the link again in our chat group. So have a good rest of I think for most of you it's afternoon or evening, so hope it's a good rest of the day ahead for what remains. But thank you again for being online, and we will talk. I think our next seminar is officially in 2 weeks. 6th of August is 2 weeks away, so we'll be talking fairly soon. Thanks everybody.
Thank you so much, Sana and Clemmy. It was really, really helpful.
Thank you, Sana.
Yeah, pleasure guys. Talk soon. Bye everybody.
Thanks, Sana. Bye.
Bye.